This is an unprecedented symptom. The attending doctor isn't here. Who's going to do the surgery? I can't do it. The doctors stood before the stretcher being wheeled into the operating room, holding their heads in despair. The person who collapsed is my mentor. I somehow managed to get him to the hospital, but his condition is so severe that no one wants to perform the surgery. If that's the case, I'll do it. I made up my mind and stepped forward. What are you saying? You're not even a doctor. There's no way you can save my father. His daughter looked at me with disbelief. And I can't blame her. After all, I'm just a part-timer at a diner. Don't worry, I'll definitely save Mitchell. I flashed a reassuring smile and rushed toward the operating room. Because I am. My name is Samuel, 29 years old. I work part-time at a diner. About a year ago, I was hired as a temporary worker because Mitchell, the owner of the diner, had been feeling unwell. Phew. I somehow made it through today's lunch rush. The diner is sandwiched between a residential area and an office district, and with the nearby university hospital, it gets packed during lunchtime. Mitchell, his wife, their daughter, and I managed to keep things running with just the four of us. I handed Mitchell a towel as he wiped the sweat from his brow and told him to take a break while I washed the dishes and cooking utensils. For the past few days, Mitchell hadn't been able to work out front, staying in the back doing support tasks. Standing for long periods made him short of breath quickly. Thanks again, Samuel. You've really been a huge help lately. No, I'm the one who should be grateful you hired me. Honestly, Dad is way too soft on you. The woman handing Mitchell a glass of water and giving me a cold look was Nicole. She's Mitchell's only daughter. With plans to eventually take over the diner, she's studying business management in college, while also working toward her culinary license and helping out at the diner. To everyone, she's the perfect daughter, always kind to the customers. In other words, she's the face of the diner. But for some reason, she's often cold toward me. If you slack off just because you're a part-timer, I'll have you out of here in no time. Despite her harsh words, I couldn't help but admire the way she swiftly dried the dishes and returned them to the shelves. That's not my intention at all. Nicole just wants you to become a full-time employee. She thinks as a part-timer, you might leave any day now. She'd be sad if you left, Dad. That's not it at all. A plate slipped from Nicole's hands. I reached out and caught it just in time. Here you go. Oh, thanks. She's not a bad person, she even thanked me properly. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, we can't trust someone who might quit at any moment. The four of us are barely keeping this place running. If you suddenly left, we'd be in big trouble. Yeah, I get it. It's an important place. As long as you understand. Watching us, Mitchell smiled as he sipped his water. Just then, he let out a violent cough. Nicole and I rushed to his side, patting him on the back. Are you okay, Dad? Did something go down the wrong pipe? Yeah. I guess I'm just getting old. What are you talking about? As I listened to the father-daughter conversation, I touched Mitchell's throat. Samuel, what's up? Mitchell, can you open your mouth for a moment? Huh? Sure. Excuse me for a second. I apologized and used the light from my phone to check inside his mouth. I couldn't get a detailed look, but I had a bad feeling, so I leaned closer and pressed my ear to his chest, listening to his breathing. Mitchell, which hospital have you been going to? The one by the station. I see. You know, it might be a good idea to get checked out at a larger hospital. If you talk to your current doctor, I'm sure they'll give you a referral. If possible, try to see Dr. Yates, he's a top-notch surgeon. Ah, got it. Mitchell jotted down my advice without hesitation. Nicole, observing the whole thing, looked at me with curiosity. Who are you, Samuel? Now that I think about it, you've never told me what you did before. Well, I just happen to know some people in that field. Anyway, make sure to go with Mitchell to the hospital. Of course, I will. A few days later, Mitchell was back in the kitchen for the first time in a while. After visiting the university hospital and seeing Dr. Yates, thanks to my referral, Mitchell had started feeling better at an impressive rate. The customers were happily chatting with him, delighted to see him again after such a long absence. Mitchell, you're looking good today. Yeah, it's all thanks to your advice, Samuel. I should have spoken up sooner. Not at all. If you hadn't said anything, I wouldn't be here with our customers today. Isn't it Dr. Yates you should be thanking? You're giving Samuel too much credit, Dad. Nicole coolly continued plating the dishes. Of course, I'm grateful to Dr. Yates, but if it weren't for Samuel, I wouldn't have even seen him. But still. Nicole, if you keep prepping with that kind of expression, the food's going to taste bad. She glanced down at her hands, startled. I'm not a chef, but I've heard that food made with care tastes different than food that isn't. Whether it's a superstition or a belief, that doesn't really matter. What's important is the care you put into the food and your customers. Sorry. She apologized sincerely, then took the finished dish to the customer, looking a bit down. A regular seemed to notice and asked her something with a concerned expression. Sorry about that, Samuel. She really is a good kid, but... Of course, I understand. She's just a bit hard to read sometimes. Exactly. When she said she'd take over the diner, she told me and her mother we weren't reliable enough. But then I heard from one of her friends that deep down, she really wanted us to focus more on ourselves than the business. She's really an amazing daughter. Isn't she, though? We shared a laugh and continued through the lunch rush that day. Even though Mitchell was doing better, overworking wasn't an option. Once the customers cleared out, I set up a chair for him to take a break, but just as he sat down, the door opened again, and two men walked in. Welcome. Mitchell stood right back up. Having customers is great, but I really want Mitchell to get as much rest as possible. I stepped forward to greet the guests. Welcome. A table for two. Yes, just the two of us. As the young man held up two fingers, I noticed a familiar face behind him. Well, if it isn't Samuel. I never thought I'd run into you here, in such a rundown place. It's been a while. The man recognized me too, and after a brief look of surprise, his face twisted into a smug, unpleasant smile. So this is where you ended up. I wondered why I hadn't seen you lately. Looks like our business practices didn't suit you. People who can't adapt to the company culture will fail no matter where they go. I still think your methods are wrong. Still going on about that? Haven't you heard the saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do? If you just followed my lead, you could have been successful. But I guess that was too hard for someone young like you to grasp, wasn't it? He glanced around the diner, laughing. You chose to work in a place like this. Maybe you're just too dumb to make proper decisions. Ha! A voice full of anger came from the back of the diner. It was Nicole. The man's companion stepped in to mediate. Kyle, that's enough. Please, have a seat. Ha! Not that I expect much. The man, apparently named Kyle, reluctantly sat down, clearly displeased. You can handle the order, Henry. I only came here because you insisted. Otherwise, who in their right mind would come to a place that reeks of mildew? The young man's name seemed to be Henry. As he opened the menu, he glanced nervously toward the kitchen, clearly flustered. I understand, but they can hear you. I'm saying it so they can hear. Ah. Okay, we'll have the daily special and a mackerel miso set for him, please. Understood. When I returned to the kitchen, Mitchell was chuckling as he started preparing the orders, while Nicole was glaring daggers at the table. If that other guy hadn't been decent, I would have thrown them out. Nicole muttered as she passed by me, clearly irritated. Do you know that rude guy, Samuel? Well, from back in the day, yeah. I dodged the question and distanced myself by helping with the meal prep. I had a feeling she'd ask more about it later, and the thought weighed heavily on me. I quietly apologized to Mitchell. It's not your fault, Samuel, so no need to apologize. Mitchell said with a smile that made me feel even more indebted to him. See? It's good, right? It's no different from what I'd eat at home. Nicole clenched her fists. I discreetly blocked her from leaving the kitchen, just in case. About 30 minutes later, Kyle and Henry stood up, and Mitchell headed to the register. I was about to go, but Mitchell stopped me, and he signaled to Nicole to stay back as well. If they pick a fight on their way out, it'll be more trouble than it's worth. Okay. Nicole, seemingly aware of the truth in that statement, backed down quietly. I didn't want to get involved with them either, so I stayed back and watched from a distance as Mitchell handled the payment. Let's see, your total is Suddenly, Mitchell clutched his chest and began coughing violently. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion, even though it only took a second. With a loud thud, Mitchell collapsed in front of the register. We all stood there, stunned. Dad! Nicole's hollow voice snapped me back to reality. Mitchell! I quickly laid Mitchell on his back and checked for consciousness. He was unresponsive, his face pale. Not only did he not answer my calls, but his breathing had completely stopped. A heart attack. Without knowing his exact condition, I couldn't risk doing anything reckless. I sent Nicole to call an ambulance, secured Mitchell's airway, and started performing CPR. Kyle, check his pulse. Henry, clear a path for the ambulance. Henry immediately followed my instructions and rushed out. But Kyle, watching Mitchell's condition, shook his head. Looking at him, it's no use. There's nothing we can do. He's important to me. Even if he wasn't, it's a doctor's duty to save people, no matter who they are. I threw those words at him, continuing CPR. Not long after, the sound of sirens approached from the distance. As Mitchell was loaded onto a stretcher, Nicole and I climbed into the ambulance with him. While the paramedics fitted him with a respirator, one of them glanced at me, clearly surprised. Samuel, what are you doing here? Focus on him for now. Nicole, please explain Mitchell's medical history. Right. Nicole pulled out notes from Mitchell's past doctor visits and listed the medications he'd been taking. Given the short amount of time, it was impressive how she managed to gather everything from their home. He was doing well today, it might be some kind of attack. Is his primary doctor Dr. Yates? He's out of the country for a conference this week. Where are we headed? I asked, and the paramedics looked to me with expectant eyes. University Hospital. It was the same hospital where Mitchell had been receiving treatment, the one I'd recommended. When we arrived, Mitchell was immediately rushed to the operating room on a stretcher. We were left waiting near the operating room, and before long, a doctor came running toward us. Nearly stumbling over himself, he reached me, panting heavily. "We've completed the preliminary tests. What's his condition?" "It seems to be complications from his underlying condition. It's extremely critical. He's still not breathing, and there's no pulse." "Who's performing the surgery?" "Well, the symptoms are unprecedented, and..." "So what? How many doctors do you have here?" Every second was precious, yet the doctor hesitated, fumbling for words. "Are you telling me there's no doctor here confident enough to take this on?" "That's absurd. There's no time for this." I knew there was no point in yelling. But the incompetence of the hospital left me on the verge of losing it, overwhelmed by frustration and anger. I couldn't leave Mitchell's life in their hands. "I'll do it." "What?" "I'm qualified. There shouldn't be a problem." "What are you saying?" Nicole, who had been trembling in silence since we arrived, looked at me in disbelief. "Are you out of your mind? You're not a doctor. There's no way you can save my father." "Don't worry. I'll save him, I promise." I held Nicole's hands tightly, looking her straight in the eyes, and made a promise. "Okay." Pressed by the intensity of my resolve, Nicole nodded. Leaving her there, I rushed into the operating room. 2 hours later, after doing everything I could, I stood over Mitchell as he slept. "Dad!" Nicole collapsed at the bedside, crying beside Mitchell. "Honey!" Mitchell's wife, who had been away on an errand that day, arrived, led in by a nurse. She stood next to Nicole, taking Mitchell's hand in hers. "Samuel, you saved him." "Well, yes." As I gave a small nod, she bowed deeply. "Thank you so much for saving him. It's what any doctor would have done." The surgery was a success. As the tension finally released from my body, I sank into a nearby chair. "Impressive work, Samuel." One of the younger surgeons handed me a towel, offering a respectful nod. Other doctors from the same department stood just outside the room, whispering, "Samuel really pulled through again," in hushed tones. "You were the only one who didn't give up," the younger doctor murmured. I playfully knocked on his forehead. "Listen, no matter how difficult the surgery, as long as there's even a 1% chance, you can't just give up." "I'm only glad I was here." "Were you scared?" "Sorry." The younger doctor left the room with his head bowed. The other doctors, likely fearing they might be the next to get scolded, quietly dispersed from outside the room. Letting out a sigh of frustration, thinking, "This is exactly why I never wanted to return to the hospital," Nicole lifted her tear-streaked face and looked at me. "Samuel, who are you?" "Well, no, I think I know now." "You're a doctor here, aren't you?" "Yeah, more or less." "Why were you working part-time at our diner?" "You saw it yourself." "I got tired of how things were here. I used to be the top surgeon at this hospital, known as the lead in the department. I had nicknames like the Hand of God and Genius Surgeon, which felt a little embarrassing. But my success rate in difficult surgeries was so high that patients came from overseas just to have me operate on them. Things started to go downhill about a year ago, when Kyle was appointed as a professor and took over as head of surgery. Once Kyle became the top figure in the department, the culture began to change. Under his leadership, many doctors prioritized wealthy patients, offering them faster and better care. Discriminating against patients based on money should never happen. Yet under Kyle's orders, those swayed by greed began treating wealthier patients preferentially. Not only that, Kyle started taking my well-off patients and making himself their primary doctor. If it meant the patients would get better, I had no problem with him taking over. But when it came time for surgery, he'd assign me as his assistant. He would then leave all the difficult procedures to me and take credit for the entire operation. Kyle lied to the patients, making them believe he performed the surgeries, earning their trust and gratitude. I thought about telling the patients the truth, but the doctor-patient relationship is built on trust. Even a small lie could damage that bond and cause unnecessary stress for the patients. I didn't want to risk putting my important patients in danger just to protect my own reputation. As long as they recovered, that was all that mattered. I kept telling myself that to endure it, but when a surgery didn't go well, Kyle would shift the blame onto me. No one dared to go against Kyle, and everyone turned a blind eye. Medicine is supposed to be a team effort. But how can you trust your colleagues when things are like this? There was no trust between any of us. If something went wrong, it was all blamed on me. The feelings of distrust and frustration swirled in my head, and gradually, I became afraid of performing surgeries. It was Mitchell who noticed and cared for me during that dark time. He ran the diner I frequented during my lunch breaks, and it seems he had noticed how tired and worn out I was becoming. One day, when the diner was quiet and no other customers were around, he brought me a dessert I hadn't ordered. "Since you're a regular, this one's on us. Plus, if you've got any complaints to get off your chest, I'm all ears." That's when I finally opened up to him, the man who had been nothing more than a diner owner to me. "I see. That's rough. No wonder going to work feels like a burden." "Yeah. If you figured out what's stressing you out, maybe it's best to take a step back for a while. Why don't you take a break?" "But doing nothing would just make it worse." "In that case, why don't you help out at the diner?" "Help out? Here?" "Yeah. I'm getting older, and it's been harder to keep up. I've been going to the hospital more often, too. My daughter's going to start helping out next month, but she's not really suited for the heavy lifting." "Are you sure it's okay?" "I should be the one asking you that," Mitchell said, flashing his trademark grin. I decided to take him up on his offer, taking a break from my medical career to work part-time at the diner. It gave me the space I needed to escape those dark, stressful days. So that's how I ended up here, and I owe Mitchell more than I can say. He helped me find myself again. I didn't know that. Nicole listened to my story without a hint of doubt in her eyes. "It happened a month before you started helping out. I didn't know any of that, and I've said such terrible things. I'm so sorry. And thank you for saving my dad." Nicole bowed her head deeply. The usually energetic girl now seemed fragile, whether from emotional exhaustion or simply struggling to process everything that had happened. "No, I asked Mitchell not to tell you. Whether I'm a doctor or not has nothing to do with my work at the diner. And honestly, I don't remember you saying anything all that terrible." "No. I was being mean. I know I was hard on you." "Well, I figured you were just having a hard time being straightforward. So, you're saying that all my self-loathing afterward was pointless? Wait, you were feeling like that?" She turned red and ignored me. A week later, Mitchell was discharged from the hospital. Although he would need more frequent checkups, he seemed relieved that I was now his primary doctor. Yes, I returned to my role as a surgeon at S University Hospital. Successfully performing Mitchell's surgery restored my confidence in facing patients once again.
The diner remained closed until Mitchell's health stabilized, but he, Nicole, and his wife spent their time productively, coming up with new menu ideas. Dr. Yates, Mitchell's original primary doctor, was shocked by everything that had happened in his absence but praised me for what I had done to address the fear that had gripped some of the other doctors. Dr. Yates also initiated regular study sessions, which were more like lectures aimed at preventing such hesitation in the future. As one of the lecturers, I was also called upon to stand at the podium. The hospital requested my help in restoring its reputation by demonstrating my skills and commitment as a doctor to those around me. Dr. Yates personally apologized for being absent during Mitchell's crisis and thanked me. I decided to confide in him about the reasons behind my temporary break from surgery. He took the lead in conducting an internal investigation within the hospital. As a result, Kyle and several other doctors who had been showing favoritism toward wealthier patients were exposed. The situation didn't stay internal, though. For the past few days, the hospital director and the administration had been busy explaining things to the media. What really sealed Kyle's fate was the public outcry on social media. Apparently, when Mitchell collapsed at the diner, the door had been left open, and a small crowd of onlookers gathered outside. While not exactly commendable, one person had filmed the entire incident and posted it online, with the caption, "A competent server and an incompetent doctor," dripping with sarcasm. Of course, the video was quickly deleted, but its reach had already been immense. By that same evening, Kyle's name and the hospital where he worked had been identified. He had plastered his face all over the top of the hospital's homepage, which ironically backfired on him. While I watched it unfold almost as if it were someone else's problem, he was reprimanded by the hospital director. The loss of trust in the hospital, combined with the timing of my report, exposed his misdeeds. He was fired for violating employment regulations and for his incompetence as a doctor. He is currently searching for a new job, but naturally, no hospital, or any place for that matter, wants to hire someone whose face is now recognized not just in the medical field, but by the public as well. Every now and then, I hear from fellow doctors at other hospitals that he was turned away again. With he and other self-serving doctors gone, the hospital has finally become a place where patients can receive equal treatment. Now, I'm able to focus on my patients and lead fulfilling days as a doctor. After I left the diner, they started offering a bento service, thanks to Nicole's suggestion to reduce Mitchell's time spent in the kitchen. It was her way of lightening the load on her father. Today's, ginger pork bento looks delicious. Of course it is. My dad made it. Nicole said proudly as I peeked into the lunchbox she handed me outside the hospital. She had been delivering these bentos to me every day as a way of thanking me for saving her father. Every single day. Oh, is that a homemade lunch? Lucky guy. Henry, one of the hospital's younger doctors, happened to spot us and whistled teasingly. He had started working as a resident while I was on leave, so he knew little about me or Kyle's downfall. He was still fresh to the medical world. He was also a regular at the diner and recognized Nicole well. "It's not like that. It's my dad's cooking," Nicole quickly defended, flustered. "Lucky for you either way. Samuel, let's hit the diner together next week." "Sounds good." "Wait, you're coming? Is that a problem?" "I never said that." As usual, Nicole's attitude toward me was strict. But this time, she surprised me. "By the way, I know you're a great doctor now, but if anything like this ever happens again,
You're always welcome to come work at the diner. Could it be that I now had another place where I belonged? Thanks, Nicole. You're really kind, you know? Me? Yeah. You're a good daughter, you work hard for the diner, and you've been bringing me these bentos. That's just because you saved my dad. It's not like I'm doing this because I want to. Oh? Then you don't have to push yourself. Who said I'm being forced? Watching Nicole's stubborn reaction, I remembered something Mitchell had told me during his recent checkup. Nicole's been a little down since you left the diner, but ever since she started delivering those bentos, she's been humming to herself. She must really like you. Mitchell had said with a chuckle, glad that his daughter seemed to have found someone special. What? As Nicole mounted her bike to head back to the diner, I decided to offer some advice, even though I knew it wasn't my place. You know, if you were a bit more honest with yourself, you'd come across as an even more charming woman. What? Mind your own business. And what do you mean even more? Don't get cocky with me. Her voice cracked as she wobbled on her bike and pedaled away. I called out, "Be careful," though I wasn't sure if she heard me. Trust that had been broken doesn't recover easily, but I now have allies by my side. For a while, I had feared surgery, but I've been reminded that there are lives I can save with my own hands. And now, I have more places where I belong. There are people I can trust. As long as they're with me, I can keep going. What once felt like a narrow field of view is opening up. I want to face my work and my patients with honesty and the courage to believe in myself again. I believe that by doing this, it's my way of repaying everyone for their kindness. Go buy me some coffee. The young department head, Travis, said a few words and looked down on us as he tossed a dollar coin in our direction. The sound of the coin clattering on the floor echoed through the room, followed by the snickers of the employees. Just then, the door burst open with a loud bang, drawing everyone's attention. There stood President Arnold, his face pale and trembling uncontrollably. My name is Luke Cash. At 39, I am the chairman of a conglomerate overseeing 50 group companies. They say your name reflects who you are, and right now, I can say I'm living up to mine, overflowing with wealth and shining brightly. That being said, it hasn't all been smooth sailing. Just because someone has a lucky name doesn't mean they're guaranteed an easy life. Otherwise, the world would have no hardship. Still, I'm proud of the fact that I worked hard to live up to the name I was given. When I was born, my family was relatively well off. Though I don't remember much, I'd been told my father made a fortune through investments. However, when the bubble burst, things took a turn for the worse. We lost almost everything, and my father's company collapsed, leaving behind nothing but debt. It dwindled from its peak, shrinking in size, and eventually became little more than a name before going bankrupt. By then, the debt was minimal. But my parents still couldn't find work. With no other options, we moved back to my mother's family farm. Luckily, my maternal grandparents welcomed my father with open arms. You were the only ones who helped us when the farm was in trouble. Now, it's our turn to help you. With those words, my grandfather patted my father's shoulder, and tears streamed down my father's face. I later learned that a hurricane had once devastated the crops, leaving my grandparents with no income for the year. They specialized in high-end, limited edition crops, and the storm dealt a severe blow. So they were at a loss as to how difficult it would be to even get through that year. With no other recourse, they were on the verge of selling off their land and fields, but my father extended financial support just in time. That support lasted for several years, enabling them to rebuild, including implementing disaster prevention measures.
This was long before my father struck it rich, back when my parents were newlyweds. I was about 5 when we moved to my grandparents' farm, and it was around that time that I first truly understood the proverb, "One good turn deserves another." That moment became a deep, lasting memory as I grew older. This event, which left a lasting impression on me during my childhood, became deeply etched in my heart as I grew older. Growing up in the countryside, surrounded by fields, I helped with farming while studying and working part-time to improve the efficiency of our business transactions. Eventually, I was accepted into a prestigious university abroad. While my grandparents were sad to see me go so far away, my parents were thrilled. Do what you want, the way you want to do it. My father, who once had the presence of a company president, had fully become a farmer. However, after he started helping with my grandparents' work, sales steadily increased. I remain deeply grateful that he funded most of my overseas education, despite my intention to cover it with my part-time job earnings. Even though the farm had grown steadily, handling only a small number of premium varieties meant that having savings for emergencies was always a good idea. Yet, my father went as far as dipping into those savings to send me money while I was studying abroad, ensuring I wouldn't struggle. In reality, living overseas was tough due to the differences in costs and culture, and the support I received, not just financially but also in the form of food shipments, was a huge help. Thanks to that, by the time I graduated, I had made connections with friends and companies overseas, and I returned home full of optimism. While my grandparents and parents were just happy to have me back, I wasn't content to stop there. I was determined to repay all the kindness and support I had received. Fueled by that desire, I launched my own business as soon as I returned to Japan. The friends I studied with at university all shared the same Japanese background, and the classmates I recruited also joined. A group of eager young people came together, and what started out like a club activity eventually became a company. Although we had knowledge in our respective fields, we lacked experience. Because of that, we faced many failures, but each time, we managed to get through it with the advice and support of university professors, companies I became close with overseas, and friends. Before I knew it, most of the original members had moved on to other paths. Yet, the company we built had grown into a conglomerate with 50 group companies, and I found myself the chairman of this vast enterprise. Managing such 50 group companies requires great effort. Of course, I make sure to check in and ask if there are any internal issues. We've even set up hotlines for reporting problems. These hotlines are centralized at the main office to streamline reporting to the executives. In serious cases, I would be contacted directly, but typically I just receive a report after the issue has been resolved. And all I have to do is review and sign off on it. So far, no unresolved problems have ever reached me directly from headquarters. I was impressed with how well everything seemed to be handled, but then a thought crossed my mind. While the branches seem fine, what about the headquarters? The main office is the hub for those hotlines, after all. Perhaps some of the employees there have things they find difficult to speak up about. Normally, these things are wrapped up during the internal audits we conduct several times a year. But I started feeling the need to see the state of the company with my own eyes. So, whenever I had some leeway at work, I began reaching out to the president and, while keeping my identity hidden, posed as a branch employee just visiting, to observe what was happening at headquarters. While I trusted the current president and his team, since they chose the staff and executives, there was still a part of me that wanted to verify things for myself. This time, my visit to headquarters followed the same pattern, but there was another reason as well. Just last week, I wanted to check in on Simon, who recently joined us mid-career. Simon is a college classmate and one of the founding members of this company.
The success of the company is partly due to his contributions. After graduating, Simon was fortunate to marry his fiancée right away.
However, with the company growing rapidly, he hardly had time to spend with his wife before their child was born. His wife, who had always been in fragile health, had to stay in the hospital for an extended period, making it hard for her to care for the baby. And at the time, our company wasn't exactly known for offering high salaries despite the heavy workload. After much deliberation, Simon informed me of his decision to take an offer from a major IT company, bowing his head as he told me,
"I'm sorry I can't stay to help until the end." To Simon, I simply said, "It can't be helped. Don't worry about it. Just take care of your wife." The new company paid well and even offered paternity leave for men.
Simon used the leave to dedicate himself to caring for his wife and newborn until she was discharged. More than 10 years have passed since then.
Recently, the major IT company he worked for went under, leaving Simon jobless. That's when I reached out to him, asking, "How about working with us again?"
Simon, who said, "I was struggling to find a new job," happily accepted the offer. Curious about how Simon was doing after being rehired, I decided to visit. Simon joined one of our group companies, which focuses on IT services. It's one of the top performing companies in the group and is often considered an elite branch. Although I want employees to have a sense of healthy competition, I don't believe in ranking or elitism within the group. Each company has different concepts and products. Some companies are bound to have slower growth, and I'm grateful for those that manage to maintain steady performance,
even without skyrocketing growth.
As a chairman, I've made sure to communicate this philosophy to the employees, but that doesn't mean it has fully sunk in with everyone.
I had overlooked something so simple. To get back on track, I visited the company Simon had joined. Since this was an unannounced visit, President Arnold, flustered, quickly handed me a temporary employee badge and said, "Feel free to look around." However, he looked pale and nervous, making me regret coming without notice. I knew that having me, the chairman, drop by unexpectedly would be stressful for him. I told him I only wanted to check on a specific department and would leave soon after, then stepped out of his office. I headed straight to the room marked IT department, where I spotted a familiar figure and called out, "It's been a while, Simon." Simon turned around at the sound of my voice. "Luke, thanks for everything lately." We shook hands, catching up for the first time in a long while. At that moment, a loud, youthful voice echoed through the room. "Hey, newbie. Slacking off again, are you?" "I'm sorry, Travis. I just ran into an old friend." Simon bowed to the young department head, who looked to be in his 30s. "You too. If you're just here to observe, don't get in the way of the employees," the head shouted at me, and I humbly bowed my head as well. "Oh, I apologize." At the same time, a question started forming in my mind. Slacking off at work? Simon? The word impossible came to my mind. Simon is one of the most diligent men I know. On top of that, he laid the foundation for the IT company he's now working for. There's no way he would slack off at work. However, Simon casually raised his hand to me with a "sorry about that" and returned to his work. Only Travis remained. I decided to ask the department head, Travis, casually. Simon and I were college classmates. "He's impressive, isn't he?" "Ha! He's just a guy we hired mid-career after his company went bankrupt right before he turned 40. Travis spoke, his words dripping with clear disdain. The conditions he demanded when joining were a joke,
no overtime, leaving early often.
A man who can't even work properly shouldn't be a full-time employee, Travis muttered with a sneer.
And the situation started to become clear to me. Simon's wife has always been sickly, and their child is only just about to turn 10. If something happened at school, Simon would likely have to leave to pick them up. Taking all of that into account, I hired him on those terms.
He has that much skill.
In fact, I had considered bringing him on as a consultant, working only a few hours a week, but Simon had laughed it off, saying,
"If I showed up out of the blue, it would just confuse the other employees."
That's why I had only told everyone that he was hired mid-career from a bankrupt company, but this is the result. Travis's sense of entitlement made him look down on Simon. Even though I hadn't disclosed Simon's accomplishments, his ability should have been obvious through his work, or so I thought. After talking to some of the other employees, I learned that, due to his inability to work overtime or the uncertainty of when he might need to leave early, Simon wasn't given any real tasks.
Instead,
he was stuck doing menial chores like making tea, organizing documents, running the shredder, and taking out the trash.
Angered by this, I confronted Simon. "Why aren't you complaining about this?"
"I didn't bring you back here to do this kind of work."
Simon gave me a wry smile. "Travis is Mr. Arnold's son. So what?" "I'm the chairman."
"That's true, but..."
Simon trailed off.
Simon himself was one of the company's founders. Yet, he just laughed and accepted the situation. Travis is trying so hard to impress his father.
"Honestly, it's kind of endearing," Simon said, seemingly unbothered. "Plus, I get to leave on time without any overtime, which is really helpful." "But this isn't the work you want to be doing, is it?" "Well, no. But even just watching the progress is enjoyable for me."
It seems Simon wasn't interested in improving the situation, and since he felt that way, I thought it best to leave it at that. At least, that's what I thought until what I saw next made me reconsider.
"Hey Simon, organize these documents too."
The shredder's jammed.
"Get to work." "Got it."
"Sorry about that," Simon replied. It wasn't just Travis, but other employees were also treating Simon harshly.
Travis didn't step in or reprimand anyone.
It seemed they never intended to give him any meaningful work. Watching Simon being treated like he was invisible, I was filled with frustration. I didn't care if Travis was President Arnold's son. Seeing my talented friend being looked down upon by this younger man irritated me to no end.
But Simon didn't seem to mind and kept working.
Knowing him, I understood that despite his technical expertise, he preferred a work-life balance that allowed him to prioritize his family,
even if it meant putting up with some dissatisfaction. If that's how he wanted to handle things, I wasn't in a position to interfere.
The IT department was full of young employees, with Simon being the oldest. Maybe, to them, belittling an older mid-career hire was their way of blowing off steam. However, I was furious that my employees were treating one of their own in such a degrading manner.
Even if we had a proper hotline for complaints, someone like Simon wouldn't use it.
Just as I was wondering what to do, it was time for lunch, so I invited Simon to join me. It had been a while since we last saw each other, and even though we could discuss the future another time, I wanted to enjoy our meal together today.
"Hey, Simon. Let's grab lunch together."
As I headed toward Simon to suggest this, Travis, who had spotted us, appeared with an arrogant attitude.
"Oh, you two are together? Perfect. I'm about to have lunch with my dad too."
I wasn't sure what he meant by perfect, but Simon gave me a look that said, "Sorry about this." It must be a regular occurrence for him. Before I could wonder what was happening, Travis sneered and said, "Go buy me some tea," tossing a dollar coin at us. The sound of the coin clattering on the floor echoed, followed by the stifled laughter of the other employees. Suddenly, the door burst open with a loud bang, and everyone's attention turned toward it. There stood President Arnold, pale as a sheet and trembling.
"Dad, what are you doing standing there?"
Travis asked, hurrying over to his father, clearly alarmed by his shaking figure.
But President Arnold didn't even acknowledge his son. Instead, he dropped to his knees and bowed deeply. "I deeply apologize." "Chairman Cash, are you hurt?"
The room fell silent.
"Dad, what are you talking about? He's just a trainee from the branch. What are you saying?" "This is the chairman, here to check on his friend," President Arnold explained, and Travis's face grew paler by the second. "Wait. He's not a trainee from the branch, but the chairman?"
Travis stammered as he slowly looked at me, terrified.
I simply nodded.
With a sharp intake of breath, Travis dropped to his knees beside his father and bowed deeply.
"I had no idea. Please forgive my ignorance and behavior,"
he stammered, trying to explain himself. Meanwhile, the other employees watched with fearful expressions, too scared to intervene. As for me, I was beyond furious at how Simon had been treated, and I'm sure my face reflected that. Amidst the tense atmosphere, it was Simon who finally spoke up. His usual calm tone lightened the mood. "Luke, your face is way too scary."
"Didn't I tell you to tone it down when you get mad? Come on, say something to them."
His words snapped me back to reality. If I let President Arnold and Travis stay in this groveling state, I'd be no better than they were.
"Both of you, stand up for now. I'll accept your apologies later. First, I want to hear about the current state of this department."
At my words, the two of them slowly stood up. However, their eyes still showed fear, and their faces remained pale.
"Simon, are you okay with this? Do I really have to come alone?"
"Of course," I replied, taking his hand and leading him, along with President Arnold and Travis, to the meeting room. I sat on the high-quality sofa at the head of the room, while President Arnold and his son sat on the long sofa next to me.
Across the table, on the opposite sofa, Simon sat alone.
Travis, still not fully grasping why Simon was there, occasionally shot glares at him, only to be scolded by President Arnold. It seemed Travis could no longer contain himself.
"Mr. Cash, I deeply apologize for the disrespect, but why is Simon here?"
Before President Arnold could rush to stop him, I responded to Travis directly.
"He's my close friend."
I was curious if he was working in a good environment, so this visit is purely personal.
"Don't worry about it." But just as I was about to address his treatment of Simon, Travis interrupted. "So what? Don't you think the way Simon is being treated is overly preferential? He can't do his job properly as a full-time employee,"
Travis said boldly, and President Arnold buried his head in his hands.
"Is that really true? Have you ever assigned him a proper task after reviewing his experience and conditions?" At my somewhat cold words, Travis faltered.
He admitted that from the start, Simon had only been assigned basic tasks like clocking in and out, never allowing him to use the computer for anything more.
Hearing this, my anger flared up again. "Who do you think Simon is?"
I was about to shout, but it was Simon himself who stopped me.
"Calm down, Luke. It's also my fault for not saying anything. But so what? What does Simon being close to Mr. Cash have to do with anything?
That's no reason to bring personal matters into work. It was clear that Travis was irritated by Simon's attempts to calm the situation. In Travis's outburst, it became painfully obvious that he had no idea who Simon really was. Come to think of it, President Arnold didn't know much about Simon either. President Arnold had been hired during a time when we were in need of talent, after Simon had already left.
And perhaps he hadn't fully understood Simon's value.
I glanced at Simon, then spoke to him directly. Simon, I'm partly to blame for not explaining things, but it's also a problem that you didn't speak up.
Yeah, maybe. Should I be the one to explain?
Yes, but let me say this first.
I looked directly at President Arnold and Travis. I said Simon is a close friend, but that's not all. He was one of the founding members of this company. President Arnold and Travis were left speechless. Yeah, that's true. But due to certain circumstances, I had to step away.
I'm sure I caused trouble for Luke, Simon said apologetically.
And honestly, he was right.
The circumstances were understandable, so I never complained, but Simon had been the core of our IT department. Even now, the core system we use is still based on what he built, and the easy-to-understand manual he left behind saved us more than once. No, I should say it was thanks to him that we managed to keep things going. The one who really stepped up was President Arnold, who is now leading the company. At the time, I was desperately searching for someone to replace Simon and handle our IT needs.
That's when I randomly met Silas Arnold. Silas sat alone in the park, staring blankly.
Tears streaming down his face as he confessed that he had been laid off and couldn't bear to face his family. When I asked, he told me he was in his late 40s.
It's certainly a tough age to find a new job.
I wondered if, based on his experience, I might be able to hire him at my company. Out of sympathy, I brought up the idea, and he looked at me, wide-eyed in surprise. Later, he held onto the business card I gave him as if it were precious, bowed deeply, and we parted ways.
When he showed up for the interview,
I was shocked after reviewing his resume.
I was convinced he could be the one to follow in Simon's footsteps. So Simon was the one who created that foundational system. President Arnold murmured, staring at Simon in astonishment.
Simon gave a modest smile, looking slightly embarrassed.
That's right. I wrote the manual and left it for those who came after me.
I was surprised at how well it's been optimized over the past 10 years.
I'm glad to hear that.
When I first saw the system, I was amazed by how innovative it was. I became so absorbed in working with it that,
before I knew it, I'd become president.
Arnold said with a chuckle, to which Simon responded with a warm smile.
I'm glad it was you who took over after me. Luke has always had a good eye for people.
I felt a bit embarrassed at the compliment, though I believed luck had played a large part. Meanwhile, Travis, who had been listening to our conversation, wore an expression that was hard to read. Finally, he hesitantly spoke up.
May I say something?
All of us older folks turned to him, causing him to flinch for a moment before he straightened up and began speaking.
I'm grateful to Mr. Cash. I joined this company to repay a debt.
A debt? I don't recall doing anything for you, I replied, tilting my head in confusion.
But Travis slowly shook his head.
You saved my father. Back then, he was unfairly laid off by a boss who disliked him, and it was unbearable to watch. Travis's eyes, filled with compassion as he looked at President Arnold, were those of a son who deeply loved his father. At the time, our family was really struggling. My mother worked part-time, and I had a part-time job just to keep us going. So we had almost given up hope of my father finding another job. President Arnold nodded repeatedly in agreement with Travis's words. He was likely recalling those difficult times. I remembered the hopeless expression on Silas's face when I first met him in the park. It was hard to watch, he was in such a terrible state. It was around that time when my father got accepted at an interview with a rapidly growing company, and for the first time in a long while.
He smiled again. President Arnold looked at Travis, surprised by his words.
And not only that, but he was placed in the IT department, where he could fully use his skills.
It meant so much to us.
At the time, our company was extremely busy, and President Arnold worked tirelessly, without regard for his own well-being. It was because of these contributions that I appointed him as president. As it turned out, his efforts also saved their family. Travis's mother was able to quit the part-time job she wasn't used to, and Travis could finally focus on his studies. And so, Travis joined the company where his father served as president, earning his place through merit. Travis, the capable and skilled son of President Arnold, took great pride in his abilities. This pride led him to strongly disapprove of anyone he felt was unworthy of working under his father.
I thought I was choosing employees based on both their education and abilities.
According to Travis, he valued new employees' technical skills and passion for their work. He took pride in the IT department and would report to HR, requesting transfers for those he felt lacked motivation,
believing they weren't suited for the department.
As he spoke in the past tense, Travis glanced over at Simon. But then, this guy joined mid-career, forced upon us from above.
He never worked overtime, often left early, and it infuriated me. Travis clenched his hands tightly on his knees.
The deep wrinkles forming in his pants made it clear that he was holding back intense anger.
Even during the busiest times, my father worked relentlessly.
I knew he was doing it for our family, so I couldn't say anything. For a brief moment, regret flickered in Travis's eyes. But that regret quickly turned into anger, directed at Simon.
I get that Simon's talented. He probably has a lot of skills. But why didn't he show them? Isn't he ashamed to take a salary for doing such menial work while being insulted? I see now. I finally understood why Travis had been so harsh toward Simon. He grew up watching President Arnold work tirelessly. Travis himself is extremely serious when it comes to work. However, I've also heard complaints about him being arrogant or overly blunt. But he's silenced his critics through his strong performance and abilities. With such a strong sense of pride, it was no surprise that his IT department was filled with loyalists, leading to the current situation. Simon nodded and said calmly, "Yeah, I was wrong too. I'm sorry."
But I didn't mind because I wanted to prioritize my family over work. Having left the company once, Simon had no desire to boast about being one of the founders. Since the work under Travis's leadership was running smoothly, he didn't bother worrying about his treatment. He had always been a laid-back guy, but at this point, it was almost frustrating.
"Simon, that's exactly the problem," I said. "I know.
I feel bad for dragging you into this, Luke.
But can I explain my side of things?"
And so, he quietly began explaining his current situation. Simon explained that his wife, who was in fragile health and frequently in and out of the hospital, along with their young child, made it difficult for him to work overtime. If he received a call from the school or hospital, he had to leave early to take care of them. By the time he finished speaking, Travis's face had turned bright red. He then bowed deeply, almost hitting his head on the desk as he apologized.
"I'm so sorry, I'm unfit to be a department head.
I never bothered to check your situation, and I wrongly labeled you incompetent. His voice trembled, on the verge of tears, as he kept his head down. Beside him, President Arnold also bowed his head in apology. I deeply apologize for my son's actions.
I am equally at fault for not noticing this sooner. Please allow Simon to take over as president. At this, Simon hastily stood up. No, please don't. I already left the company once, and with my current situation, the terms I'm under are perfect for me. But then, and what about, a three-way back and forth of apologies began. While the issue had been resolved, with everyone now understanding each other's position and reconciling, this tug-of-war over the presidency erupted because they all respected each other's abilities. And they were doing it all while completely ignoring me, the one who actually decides who becomes president. Finding the whole situation a bit ridiculous, I decided to sit back, sip my coffee, and watch their chaotic debate as if it were background music. In the end, everything was settled, and we continued on as if nothing had happened. Both the president and the department head remained in their positions, and Simon continued working in the IT department. Of course, nothing changed regarding his conditions. He still left work on time and occasionally left early when needed. But after everyone became aware of his situation, no one complained anymore. The one notable change was that Simon's tasks shifted from menial jobs like making tea and organizing documents to maintaining the core systems and training new employees. He was also consulted by Travis on matters like the introduction of new equipment and programs, acting as an advisor. Simon seemed to genuinely enjoy working with the ever-evolving technologies, enthusiastically engaging with his tasks. When I spoke with him, he prefaced his comments by saying, "Well, my old job was easy and nice. But it's great to be working with new technology again," he added with a smile. His cheerful face, full of youthful energy, reminded me of when we first founded the company, and it made me happy to see him like that. "Ah, Mr. Cash, good to see you," Travis said, giving me a quick nod before immediately turning to talk to Simon. His face was serious as he discussed a technical matter that was beyond my understanding, consulting Simon for his opinion. Gone was the arrogance from before. It seemed Simon had fully integrated into the department. Seeing this, I felt reassured and concluded my personal inspection. Still, to rise to president in just 5 years, that's impressive. When I said this to Travis, the new president of our group's IT company, he responded with a bitter expression, "Thank you." I could tell he was likely holding back the urge to shout, "You're the one who appointed me as president." That inability to fully hide his feelings shows he's still young. But given his skills, there's no problem because he's more than capable. His father, President Arnold, had been forced to retire due to long-term hospitalization, likely from overwork. Simon had firmly declined the offer to become president, saying it wasn't for him. So it was Travis, nominated by both of them, who rose to the position. Since the incident, Travis had reflected deeply and lost any sense of entitlement, working sincerely with both his job and his colleagues. He had proven himself capable of handling the responsibilities of president. Recognizing this, his promotion was swiftly decided. In fact, the most overwhelmed by the situation was likely Travis himself. Poor guy. The other group presidents, upon hearing of Simon's return and the events that followed, were eager to take the newly appointed young president under their wing. He'd surely be given a warm, if teasing, welcome at the next executive meeting. I'll offer him some sympathy, though. The other presidents don't dislike him. They just want to celebrate the earnest young president while having a little fun teasing him. I'm really counting on you, so keep up the good work. Yes, sir. Travis replied with enthusiasm. I knew this company is going to keep growing, and I silently vowed to continue creating an environment where everyone could focus on their work without overlooking even the smallest of issues. Why are you in the bathroom? Were you trying to peek at me? You're the worst. I had been enjoying the company trip and banquet, but I never expected to get scolded after helping the president's daughter. I tried to explain calmly, but the next day, I was summoned by her. Judging by her demeanor, she was probably really angry. I straightened up and waited for her to speak. But then, for some reason, she moved closer to me and, "So, what did you think of my body?" "What?" "My name is Daniel, just an ordinary guy in my early 20s working as a regular office worker. However, my appearance is anything but ordinary, thanks to a large scar running from my left temple to the corner of my eyebrow. I got this scar in a car accident when I was a kid, but anyone who sees it might think I'm someone from the underworld. Because of that, I've gone through a lot of experiences most people wouldn't have to. During my school days, classmates avoided me openly, I got harassed by troublemakers, and even as an adult, job hunting was incredibly difficult. The scar made me look bad at first glance, and during interviews, most interviewers would sigh and say, "Well, you see." But it's understandable. Salespeople deal with all kinds of people. If someone like me, with a scarred face, showed up, the first impression would take a massive hit. No, it would completely ruin it. Deals that another salesperson might have easily secured could fall through because of me, costing the company. Plus, with this scar where it is, my face just doesn't look friendly. If rumors started circulating that there's a dangerous guy in that company, it could damage the company's image. I guess I could have chosen a different career path. But I've always thought that sales, where you win contracts with your words and passion, was a cool job. It might sound odd to admire sales, but it was probably because of a comic book I read when I was a kid. Because of that, I went through dozens of interviews but couldn't get a single job offer. I started to think that I might not be able to make it as a working adult anymore. I was so discouraged that it felt overwhelming. To be clear, none of the rejection letters I received mentioned anything about my scar as the reason. But it was the way people stared at me and the reactions from interviewers that made me feel that way. Despite all that, I somehow managed to land a job as a regular office worker. When I received the job offer, I couldn't believe it. I had to check it over and over again. "Hey, Mom. I think I got a job offer." "Really? That's wonderful. We should celebrate with some sushi tonight." "Well, but I might have read it wrong." "Huh? Did you read it wrong?" "I'm not sure. Can you double check with me?" "Geez, you're hopeless. Let me see." I even had my family confirm the offer because I just couldn't believe it wasn't a mistake. When I finally accepted that it was real, my hand shook as I held the paper, and my confusion and doubt turned into joy. When my joy hit its peak, I couldn't help but pump my fist. Looking back now, it's a little embarrassing, but it was such a happy moment. I felt so grateful to the company that hired me and made a personal vow to work harder than anyone else. However, even though I managed to get the job, the scar was still a disadvantage. I had finally landed my dream sales job, and though I was officially called a salesperson, I wasn't actually given any sales work. Instead, I was stuck behind the scenes. My job was to assist the senior salespeople and my peers by gathering information on potential clients, organizing it, and analyzing it. At first, I had hoped I'd still be able to do sales despite my scar, but the tasks my boss assigned me were all menial.
It didn't take long for me to realize that I wasn't going to be allowed to do any real sales work because of my scar. At first, I was frustrated, thinking, this isn't what we agreed on, and I even considered quitting. But knowing how hard it was for me to find this job, I knew it wouldn't be easy to get hired again. So I changed my focus, deciding to work as hard as I could as a sales assistant for the company I had promised to give my all for. 2 years have passed since then, and now even my boss trusts me, saying, if you leave it to him, it'll get done. I'm still not allowed to handle sales or go out to meet clients, just quietly doing office work, but I've started to find satisfaction in it. And I'm growing attached to this job. Nowadays, I enjoy casual conversations with my coworkers in the same department, but when I was first assigned, no one talked to me. The sales department is always bustling with people coming and going. In the midst of it all, I quietly sat at my desk, diligently working away. That doesn't mean I didn't interact with anyone at all, though. I would hand over the documents I prepared to the salespeople, and I did communicate with others in the department when it was work-related. At first, I can imagine that it must have been intimidating to approach someone with a huge scar like mine. The kind you'd expect from someone in the underworld. Even I'd be scared if someone with a face like mine tried to talk to me. Understanding this about myself, I knew I had to break through the misconceptions, so I made an effort to communicate with my coworkers. I made sure to be kind, so I wouldn't scare anyone with my scar, and I always tried to smile and be cheerful. Maybe because of that, now I'm able to enjoy conversations with people just like anyone else. Sometimes, I still get nervous about the looks people give me, and I find myself eavesdropping to see what they're saying. But there's no sign that anyone's afraid, and that reassures me. In fact, I've even heard that the contrast between my scarred appearance and my kind, serious personality has made me quite popular with the women in the office. Apparently, the rumors about me have spread beyond the sales department to other departments as well. And according to those rumors, I somehow even have a girlfriend, which couldn't be further from the truth. I've never had a girlfriend in my life. It's an embarrassing rumor, to say the least. But since no one has ever mentioned it directly, I've never corrected it, and I doubt I will. Though part of me feels a little frustrated that I can't clear up the misunderstanding. In reality, I've never even had a crush on anyone. It's not surprising, considering my looks. I know that even if I did like someone, there's no way they'd ever feel the same about me. As I came to accept that, I stopped thinking about romance and have lived my life without it. Of course, I don't have any romantic feelings for Emily, the most beautiful woman in the office, either. Emily works in the same sales department as me. She's not only beautiful but also incredibly capable, the perfect example of brains and beauty. On top of that, she's the daughter of the company's president and has a wonderful personality, so from the moment she joined the department, people naturally gravitated toward her, and she quickly became popular. I've seen plenty of male employees from various departments, as well as clients, approach her. Since most of my work keeps me within the department, I've witnessed these interactions countless times. I've seen it happen so often that even I, who have nothing to do with it, find it annoying. Judging by how often she politely turns them down, I imagine she probably feels the same. If that's true, then I really admire how she continues to interact with everyone as usual, without showing any frustration. Despite being the president's daughter, she works at the company as a regular employee, which apparently is at the request of President Thompson. Having been raised in a sheltered environment, she's said to be a bit naive about the world. And her father wants her to learn how society works from the ground up. Though it wasn't explicitly stated, I overheard her say this, so I'm sure it's true. Emily has it all: the title of the president's daughter, beauty, high communication skills, and a strong passion for her work. Her enthusiasm seems to inspire those around her, with people going the extra mile in their own jobs and offering her support. For anyone in sales, she has a perfect set of qualities. It feels like her father's decision to assign her to this department wasn't just for her personal growth, but also part of a strategic move as the company's CEO. She's the complete opposite of me. Watching someone like her, who's perfectly suited for sales, only makes me feel more pitiful and jealous of her. Even though I had finally accepted and grown fond of my role as a sales assistant, the intense dislike I felt for my own jealousy kept me from ever initiating a conversation with her. Yet, every day, without fail, Emily would flash her innocent smile and greet me. "Daniel, great work today." Even though there's nothing for us to talk about, she still takes the time to greet me, treating everyone equally. That's probably one of the reasons she's so popular. Thinking this, I'd respond with my usual greeting as well. "Thanks for your hard work, Emily. Daniel, would you like to have lunch with me today?" Emily shyly invited me to lunch in a small voice. It's not every day, but she asks me out for lunch pretty regularly. Sorry. I've still got some work to finish up, so I won't have much time to relax. You always say that. Why do you keep turning me down with the same excuse every time? At least come up with some new lines if you're going to reject me. Better yet, don't reject me at all. I'm trying my best to invite you. By now, I would have thought she'd take the hint after turning her down so many times. Okay, got it. Wait. Does that mean you're finally? I'll make sure to have more excuses ready for next time. That's not what I meant. Leaving her behind, I walked off to grab lunch. Getting invited to lunch by the beautiful and popular president's daughter? It doesn't exactly feel bad. Most guys would probably think, does she have a thing for me? But I know that's not the case. At work, my relationship with her is purely professional. I'm sure she just wants to be friendly or feels like we haven't talked much, that's all there is to it. Even so, there are probably plenty of people who'd be happy to get lunch with her. If you get close enough, maybe there's a chance for something more. But I don't want that kind of relationship with any woman, Emily included. Even if it did happen, in the end, someone like her would end up with someone better looking than me. Maybe I feel this way because I'm scared of getting my hopes up and then being left behind. I've probably become cynical, always finding reasons to avoid romance. As I headed to lunch, I overheard some voices coming from the break room. It seemed like a few guys were smoking and chatting before lunch, having turned on the ventilation fan. There's a designated smoking area, but it's far from our department. So some of the sales guys sneak into the break room when no one's around for a quick smoke. She asked him to lunch again, huh? Emily. Yeah, and she's asking Daniel, right? Yep. Honestly, what'd she see in a guy with a scar like that? He looks like someone from the underworld. Yeah, I don't get it either. If I were him, I'd go with her every day. Same here. Why does he keep turning her down? Sure, Emily keeps asking, but Daniel's just as strange for rejecting her. Maybe he's shy or something? He can't be trying to play it cool, can he? Who knows? But Emily's kind to everyone, and maybe she's just talking to him about work. It makes sense, right? Emily's in high demand for sales. And Daniel's never done sales at all. Oof, that's harsh. What? There's no nicer way to put it. Well, yeah. She's good at her job and has a great personality, and she's the president's daughter, so it's no surprise she talks to him. I didn't really need to eavesdrop. I had listened out of curiosity, but it ended up feeling like a waste of time.
Frustrated, I left with a sour mood.
After lunch, I returned to the office and saw a crowd gathered around the bulletin board. With only 5 minutes left of lunch break, I wondered why everyone seemed so leisurely. Curious, I pushed through the crowd. On the bulletin board was a notice I hadn't seen before. It read "Company Trip." I overheard snippets of conversation from the group.
Oh, it's that time of year again, huh? I completely forgot about it.
We haven't had any company events for the past few years because of the pandemic.
The company trips here are always fun and well organized. Emily, we're going on a company trip.
Someone called out to Emily by name, and all eyes turned to her. She was, as usual, chatting and laughing with a group of guys. The men around her seemed excited about the company trip announcement. Their glances occasionally darted over to Emily, clearly checking her out.
Knowing her personality, I figured she'd probably throw herself into enjoying an event like this. However, her expression didn't seem as excited as I expected.
In fact, she looked a bit confused.
But that uncertainty only lasted for a moment,
as she quickly joined in the excitement with the guys around her.
Yay! A hot springs trip. Emily, are you going this year? Come to think of it, you haven't joined us in previous years, right?
Yeah, I usually have a family gathering around this time, she replied. Of course, the president's daughter would have important plans. It has nothing to do with being the president's daughter, she laughed, causing the group to chuckle along. In the midst of their laughter, she seemed to notice my gaze, and our eyes met. Feeling awkward, I quickly looked away, pretending to study the details of the company trip notice while nervously sweating.
But maybe I'll join this year, Emily said louder than before, as if announcing it to someone. The lunch break soon ended, and everyone returned to their afternoon tasks.
I also sat back at my desk, getting into my usual afternoon routine. Still, I couldn't shake the curiosity about that brief moment of hesitation on her face. But realizing I was thinking too much about her every move, I snapped out of it and refocused on my work for the rest of the day. Time passed without much change, and soon enough, the day of the company trip arrived.
To be honest, I wasn't really looking forward to it. Company trips felt like a hassle, and if I wasn't obligated to go, I wouldn't even bother.
I've never liked being in large crowds. When I was a kid, I used to get dizzy from being around too many people. It's gotten a little better since I became an adult, but big gatherings still make me uncomfortable. Even so, I attend these events because they're part of the job, a way to maintain company relationships. With a face like mine, I have to work harder to fit in and build good relationships with my coworkers. Of course, that's not the ideal reason to go, but without that effort, I wouldn't be able to show others my usual self. While it felt like an obligation, I still found it enjoyable to see my coworkers in a different light during the trips. I wondered if I'd be able to enjoy this year's trip the same way as before. With that thought in mind, I decided to make the most of the company trip. The bus carrying us headed straight to the hotel. This year's accommodation was a luxurious hotel with a large banquet hall, and everyone was dazzled by its grandeur. Well, it's all because the president's daughter is coming along, someone joked, and everyone started praising Emily. She smiled shyly and politely denied it, clearly a bit embarrassed.
After dropping off our luggage at the hotel, we were given free time until the evening banquet. Some people went sightseeing or shopping, while others decided to enjoy the famous hot springs in the area, including foot baths. As for me, I had no particular plans, so I wandered around the hotel's surroundings. Surprisingly, the area around the hotel had a bustling shopping street,
so I could pass the time walking around without getting bored. Along the way, I bumped into a few co-workers and had casual conversations, which made the afternoon more enjoyable. Night eventually fell, and we all headed to the banquet hall to start the evening festivities. As usual, the employees drank, laughed, and partied wildly. Emily, who hadn't participated in previous years, was seated a bit far from me, but she seemed to be enjoying herself, lightly tipsy and laughing at the employees' performances. The banquet, which had started in the evening, quickly flew by, and before I knew it, it was past 10 p.m. Despite the late hour, everyone was still in high spirits, laughing and cheering at the various performances. Since I'm not a heavy drinker, I had been taking it slow, but even I could feel the alcohol starting to hit me. Next to me, my supervisor, who also wasn't a strong drinker, and I were chatting away as we quietly ate and drank together. Realizing I'd had enough, I decided it was time to head back to my room. Well, I think I'm going to head back to my room now. Excuse me, I told my supervisor. He nodded, saying he might do the same, and together, we left the banquet hall. Since my supervisor's room was on a different floor, we parted ways at the elevator and returned to our respective rooms. Feeling pleasantly tipsy, I reached for the key to unlock my door. But before I could, someone else had already placed their hand on the doorknob. What? The shock sobered me up instantly. I turned around to see none other than a drunken Emily standing there. Hey! It's so mean of you to leave me behind. Without asking, she opened the door to my room and walked right in. She immediately plopped down on my bed and made herself comfortable. With my usual spot taken, I wasn't sure what to do, so I sat down on the small sofa nearby, unsure of how to handle the situation. Lying on the bed, Emily turned to face me, her cheeks flushed, gazing at me through bleary, intoxicated eyes. She looked a bit sleepy, making it hard to read what was going through her mind. Emily, I think you're confused. This is my room, not yours. I don't know what you're talking about. This bed is my spot. You can have that side. Great, she's a stubborn drunk. Seeing Emily like this, so different from her usual self, left me completely baffled. It seems that when Emily gets drunk, she turns into a bit of a giggler. She's been laughing nonstop for a while now, though I have no idea what she finds so funny. Why do you always turn me down when I invite you to lunch, Daniel? After laughing for a while, she started grumbling, clearly frustrated, as if I weren't sitting right in front of her. I didn't know how to respond, feeling like she was just dragging me along for the ride. Should I tell her the truth or not? Not that it would matter, since she probably wouldn't remember anything in this state anyway. As I mulled over what to say, Emily suddenly jumped up from the bed and began trying to undress. You know what? This room is too hot. I'm getting sweaty. I'm going to take a bath. Wait, Emily. This is my room, remember? Panicked by her sudden, outrageous actions, I grew even more flustered. Realizing I couldn't stop her on my own, I quickly decided to prevent her from undressing in front of me and guided her toward the bathroom. You can't undress here. I'll take you to the bathroom, so you can change in there. Okay. She staggered, nearly bumping into everything along the way, but I managed to get her safely to the bathroom. Once I closed the door behind her, I heard the sound of clothes being tossed aside and water filling the tub. Well, at least it seems like she's okay, I thought, returning to the sofa and deciding to wait until she was done. By the time 30 minutes had passed, I was completely sober, and I found myself reflecting on how ridiculous the situation had become. From the bathroom, I could still hear her humming away in the tub, seemingly enjoying herself. Another 30 minutes later, the noise from the bath suddenly stopped. Noticing the silence, I began to worry and knocked on the bathroom door.
Emily? Are you okay? No response.
I knocked again, but there was still nothing. After a few moments, I heard a faint sound of something hitting the water's surface, then silence again. Feeling more concerned, I couldn't bring myself to walk away from the door.
Could she have fallen asleep in the bath from all the alcohol?
The thought crossed my mind.
If that's the case, it could be dangerous.
This is basically a rescue situation, I told myself. With that justification, I burst through the door and rushed into the bathroom.
Emily! Are you okay?
What I saw shocked me. Emily was lying in the tub with her head resting against the water, her face dangerously close to sinking beneath the surface. She was sound asleep, completely unaware of her surroundings, not even noticing me entering the bathroom. As her nose dipped into the water, I quickly reached out and lifted her head above the surface, gently resting it on the edge of the tub so she could breathe properly. Thankfully, I had caught her just in time, and she resumed her normal breathing right away.
Relieved that Emily was safe, I took a deep breath and looked around the bathroom, wondering what to do next. First, I needed to wake her up.
I turned back toward her, about to call her name, when my eyes were drawn to something. It wasn't just her beautiful body that caught my attention.
Though, to be honest, her beauty was hard to ignore.
As I stood frozen, she let out a small groan.
Emily! Wake up! Emily!
I called her name a little louder than usual, and she slowly opened her eyes, looking over at me. For a moment, she seemed confused, as if she didn't recognize who I was, but soon enough, her awareness returned.
Ha! What are you doing here, Daniel?
Her tone was clearer than before, indicating that she was sobering up. As her surroundings began to sink in, she started to piece the situation together.
Why are you in the bathroom? Were you trying to peek at me? That's disgusting. I can't believe you.
She shrieked loudly, enough that I worried the people in the neighboring rooms might hear, and I quickly panicked in response. Still, I tried to stay as calm and concise as possible.
This is my room. You came in here drunk and went straight to the bath. What?
And then it got really quiet, so I got worried.
I'm sorry, but I had to check on you. Sure enough, I found you with your face almost in the water. So I helped you out.
Her eyes widened as she processed my explanation. Looking around the bathroom, something clicked for her, and she suddenly tensed up. She was starting to remember the events leading up to this.
Her face turned bright red. I'm sorry.
Having rescued her and now feeling a sense of relief, I waited for her to finish up in the bathroom while I sat back on the sofa. A short while later, Emily emerged from the bathroom, and she apologized again.
I'm really sorry.
I caused you so much trouble.
It's fine, don't worry about it. No, seriously, did I say anything weird?
She didn't seem to remember exactly what she had said earlier.
But I didn't think she had said anything particularly strange. You were fine, just like your usual self.
My reassurance didn't seem to ease her embarrassment, as she apologized once more, bowing deeply.
I'm so sorry.
I must have made such a fool of myself. Though I had gotten quite an eyeful earlier, I couldn't blame her for feeling embarrassed. After all, I had seen something very personal. I thought back to the detail I had noticed but decided against mentioning it to her.
Really, it's okay. Don't worry about it. More importantly, are you feeling up to heading back to your room? She seemed like she wanted to say something, but I brushed it off, urging her to return to her room. Yes. And so, the night ended awkwardly, but without further incident. The next day, everyone continued to enjoy the final day of the company trip as if nothing had happened. As usual, I wandered around on my own, taking in the sights. By late morning, I felt it was time to grab some lunch. So I pulled out my phone to search for nearby places to eat. Just then, my phone rang. It was Emily. I hesitated for a moment but felt a bit guilty after everything that had happened, so I answered. She was calling to invite me to lunch. Normally, I would have turned her down, but considering she wanted to apologize for the previous night, I agreed. We met up and had lunch together. During the meal, neither of us brought up what had happened the night before. Instead, we just talked about the company trip and our usual work-related topics. Surprisingly, the conversation flowed smoothly, and I found myself enjoying it more than expected. After lunch, since it was still early, we decided to head back to the hotel for a bit. As I suggested we head back, she suddenly tugged on my sleeve, stopping me in my tracks. Would you mind coming to my room for a moment? Emily's face was flushed, and she looked at me with an expression of uncertainty. Her troubled look was so cute, like a puppy about to cry, that I couldn't help but feel my heart skip a beat. But as I looked closer, I noticed her hands were trembling. Sensing something was off, I decided to follow her to her room without questioning her further. Feeling a bit anxious, I entered her room, and Emily gestured for me to sit on the sofa. Oddly enough, instead of sitting across from me, she sat right next to me, closing the distance between us. I was surprised and could feel my heart racing, but she remained silent. Not knowing what to do, a tense silence hung in the air. So, what did you think of my body? Her first words broke the silence, but they weren't what I expected at all. Her face was tense, and she was visibly shaking. I wasn't sure how to respond. She was clearly referring to the scar I had seen earlier. You're beautiful. I'm sorry, no matter the situation, it wasn't right for me to see you like that, especially since we're not even dating. Suddenly, her expression shifted to anger, and she glared at me. Stop lying. Beautiful? Are you just pitying me? What I had seen was the large scar on her chest. But I understood why she was angry. I, too, have a large scar on my face, and I knew, to some extent, how she felt. But I meant it. I really think you're beautiful. It's not pity. If anything, I understand your feelings better than most. Right? At my words, tears welled up in her eyes, and she began to share her story. Emily explained that she had suffered from a heart condition as a child, which prevented her from engaging in normal physical activities. Her father, the company president, made the decision to have her undergo major surgery to treat her heart. The scar on her chest was a result of that surgery and had remained ever since. The surgery was a success, and her body gradually recovered to the point where she could live like a normal person. As she grew older, she was able to lead a normal life just like everyone else. As she got older, she was able to enjoy a regular life, despite her status as the president's daughter. Being as beautiful as she was, it was no surprise that she had boyfriends over the years. One particular boyfriend had been kind and understanding about her past health issues, and Emily believed that he would accept her scar as well. But when they grew close and he saw the scar, his reaction shattered her hopes. Oh, sorry, I can't. Seeing that just turns me off. He looked at her with disgust, as if he were staring at a monster.
Of course, they broke up, and like me, she gave up on love. That experience led her to believe that no one would ever accept the scar on her chest. Still, she tried dating a few more times during her school years, but every boyfriend reacted the same way upon seeing her scar.
And the relationships ended. It's so selfish of them.
But I think I'm just as foolish for letting myself get involved, knowing it would end the same way. Even female friends didn't accept her scar. During a trip to the beach with a close group of girls, she showed them the scar in advance, hoping for understanding.
But the response was far colder than she anticipated. Wait, seriously? You won't get hit on by any guys with that. Emily, could you wear a swimsuit that hides it? That way, it's no big deal.
The hurtful comments caused her to drift apart from them.
And eventually, they stopped interacting altogether. But I'm still the president's daughter, so I've got money, and there are people who like me because of that.
Her voice sounded resigned, as if she had long given up.
But at some point, I became too afraid to leave the house. I ended up dropping out of school. I couldn't trust anyone and was completely alone.
Then one day, my father told me about someone who, despite having a visible scar, was working hard and getting along with others. He said I should go meet this person and learn from him as part of my life education.
I didn't expect anything to change, but then I met you, Daniel.
Despite your scar, which is impossible to hide, you were still able to connect with people and work. Seeing that made me feel like I had to try harder too. As I listened to her story, I was struck by the truth behind her words. And I felt embarrassed for all the assumptions I had made about President Thompson's motives. President Thompson hadn't placed her in the sales department to use her as a tool, but to encourage his daughter, who had been through so much. He assigned her to my department because he believed seeing me work hard despite my scar would inspire her. When I looked at Emily, I found her gazing back at me.
Daniel, you've been saving me all along. Watching you work hard, even with your scar, gave me the strength to keep smiling and moving forward instead of shutting myself off.
As she spoke, she gave me one of her usual bright and beautiful smiles. Seeing that smile, it felt like the fog that had clouded my heart for so long was finally lifting.
This scar, which I had always resented, had unknowingly helped her. I see.
I slowly and gently ran my fingers over the scar that stretched from my temple to my eyebrow. For the first time in my life, I felt grateful for having this scar.
I didn't know you thought of me that way. Well, I never had the chance to tell you before. Every time I tried by inviting you to lunch, you turned me down. So, that's why you kept asking me to lunch? Yeah, well, there are other reasons, but can I ask how you got that scar, Daniel? Oh, it's nothing dramatic. Just a car accident when I was a kid. Everything's been settled with the other party, and it's all in the past now.
But the scar never faded.
I went through a lot because of it and really hated it. But after what you said today, I don't think it's so bad anymore.
I rubbed my scar and gave a wry smile. I can imagine how hard it must have been for you, having a scar in such a visible place.
Probably even harder than it was for me. But I'm grateful you came to work at my father's company, and that I got to meet you. Thank you, Daniel. Hearing her say that so earnestly made me feel a bit embarrassed.
It had been a long time since anyone had thanked me so openly.
And one more thing.
Her face reddened even more as she struggled to get the words out.
You said my body was beautiful, even if it was just to be polite. So, wouldn't it be okay if we had lunch together from now on? You always say no.
Her face flushed bright red after she said that. Her reaction, and the way her eyes glistened as she glanced at me, made me realize something. She had feelings for me. Her gaze was filled with emotion, her eyes shimmering softly.
It wasn't just to be polite. I really do think you're beautiful. And I'm sorry I kept turning you down. The truth is, I've always kept my distance from women because I thought no one would want to be with me because of my scar. I admitted that, like her, I had carried the same fear. That my scar would eventually drive anyone away.
She looked surprised for a moment but then smiled warmly, clearly touched by my confession.
Then, if we were together, wouldn't that solve everything? What?
Her face turned even redder, and tears welled up in her eyes as she made her bold suggestion. I was shocked, but I could tell she had gathered a lot of courage to say it.
You know what? You're right. Let's do it, let's date.
As soon as I agreed, she threw herself into my chest with a burst of excitement.
I'm so happy. Thank you. I'm really looking forward to this.
Overcome with joy, she pressed herself against me and hugged me tightly. I had to mentally brace myself to maintain my composure, but I hugged her back, trying to stay calm.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too, Emily. She responded by hugging me even tighter. The next day, we shared the news with our coworkers. Emily and I were officially a couple.
Reactions ranged from surprise at the unexpected pairing to comments like, "You two actually look good together." A few of the male employees seemed frustrated that I had stolen Emily from them, but they still congratulated us in the end. Naturally, the news reached President Thompson as well. That same day, I was called into the president's office, where he asked me to take care of his daughter.
President Thompson looked me straight in the eye, and I could tell he was completely serious.
I straightened my posture in response. When I told him that I genuinely loved her, he smiled warmly.
Sorry I couldn't assign you to a sales role.
It seemed he felt guilty about not giving me more opportunities in that regard.
Please don't worry about it.
Honestly, at first, I wondered why I wasn't being sent out on sales calls, but now, I really enjoy my work as an assistant. Just being able to work under you, Mr. Thompson, is something I'm grateful for.
And on top of that, you gave me the chance to meet Emily. I couldn't be happier in life. I see. Thank you for saying that. No, thank you. I promise I'll make her happy.
Since we started dating, Emily and I had learned to accept the insecurities we once struggled with. That shift in perspective allowed us to grow not just as individuals, but also to expand our social circle.
By the time we had our wedding, we were surrounded by so many people offering their blessings.
After the wedding, matching rings adorned our left ring fingers.
Sitting side by side on a long sofa, I found myself reminiscing about the early days of our relationship. It all happened so fast, didn't it?
Yeah, it really did, I agreed. Emily reached out and gently touched the scar on my face. Our scars may never fade, but neither will my love for you.
That's a promise.
She smiled brightly, radiating happiness. Her joy was infectious, and I couldn't help but smile too. I wrapped my arm around her waist, pulling her gently but firmly toward me. Then, through her clothes, I traced the spot where her scar lay on her chest.
I feel the same way. I'll always love you.
Even now, those words are etched in my heart, and together, we continue to walk this happy journey of life. My place card at my daughter Lena's wedding, the daughter I raised on my own, labeled me as useless middle school graduate dad.
There's only one person who would pull something so petty. Elites only at this celebration.
The tense atmosphere was broken by Lena, who had torn off her wedding dress.
Dad, let's go home. Yeah, let's do that. The moment I turned to leave, a scream rang out from an unexpected direction.
And then, the guests began to tremble. What was before them was a shocking sight.
My name is Gavin.
I turned 61 this year.
I have one daughter, Lena.
She's always had a unique talent.
Daddy, look at this.
Lena, who had just turned 5, showed me a drawing she had made. It looked like a diagram from when she took apart a ballpoint pen. At the time, Lena had a habit of taking things apart to figure out how they were built. I had seen her take apart countless pens, but I never imagined she would draw a diagram of one. I knew from that moment, this girl was destined for greatness. Lena had always been physically frail and unable to play outside much. So she started doing experiments inside the house in fields that fascinated her. She became interested in astronomy and meteorology.
Daddy, why do clouds float in the sky?
It was something so obvious I had never thought about it, but she asked me with genuine curiosity. Well, you see, clouds aren't just one solid thing.
Think of them as a collection of countless droplets of water.
Because of gravity, temperature, and the weight of the elements making up those droplets, they float without falling. I thought the explanation might be a bit too advanced for young Lena, but she took my words, went to her science teacher,
and gathered all the information she could on clouds from the library.
By the age of 10, she fully understood the principles, and even her teachers were astonished. Yes, she is gifted. I don't have any particular talents myself, but her mother was beautiful and intelligent. What you'd call a perfect combination of beauty and brains. She must have inherited it from her mother.
My beloved, late wife.
The day Lena was born was also the day her mother passed away. Up until the birth, there were no issues, but just seconds after delivering Lena, my wife's condition worsened. Her body suddenly arched, and in a flash, her heart stopped. With today's medical advancements, there's about a 60 to 80% chance of survival. Even so, many people end up with lasting effects due to lack of oxygen reaching the brain. But back when Lena was born, the technology wasn't as advanced, and there was an 80% chance of death.
Of all things, my wife contracted this rare condition, which only affects a few dozen people a year in the US.
In the end, without even getting to see the child she had given her life for, my wife passed on to heaven.
I didn't know what to do.
Of course, I loved my daughter, Lena. I never had the slightest idea that she had taken her mother's life. But sometimes, when I saw her peaceful sleeping face, which so closely resembled her mother's, it felt almost cruel.
What am I supposed to do now?
The happiness I had finally found. The months I had spent with my wife, eagerly awaiting Lena's arrival, crumbled to pieces with a deafening crash. Overwhelmed by an avalanche of emotions, I cried uncontrollably until my tears ran dry. And then, a tiny voice reached out to me, seeking help from my broken self.
Lena. Oh, right, it's time for your milk, isn't it? Don't worry, I'll protect you no matter what.
Holding her fragile warmth in my arms, I made a firm decision. Even if I had to do it alone, I would raise Lena into a fine adult. I'll grant Lena anything she wants, and as her only parent, I'll stand by her side until the end.
No matter what happens. As if responding to my thoughts, Lena gently gripped my index finger. Dad, hey Dad. Huh? Oh, what were we talking about again? Get it together.
Her firm voice snapped me back to reality. The woman standing in front of me, smiling as brightly as the sun, was the spitting image of my late wife. She is Lena, my daughter. She's grown into a fine, independent woman and will be turning 24 this year. Her healthy, sun-kissed skin, her slightly wavy long chestnut hair, and those light blue eyes. Hey, which of these do you think looks better? How about the powder blue dress on the right? It matches your eyes and looks beautiful. Hearing that, Lena's eyes shimmered gently, and she smiled softly. Her mother had the same slightly wavy chestnut hair and light blue eyes. As Lena grew up, noticing these little resemblances to my wife became a quiet joy for me. And now, Lena is about to get married. Her fiancé is a man named Kyle, who works at the same company as her. When they came to announce their engagement, I had a good impression of him. I'm still inexperienced. A woman like Lena probably doesn't even need a partner because she's such an amazing person. But people sometimes push themselves too hard, rather than supporting her or providing for her. I want to be the person who stays by her side and steps in when she needs to slow down. Hearing a young man say something like that surprised me a bit. But most of all, since Lena chose him, I had no complaints. I was moved by his sincerity in those words, and I gave my blessing for the marriage. Not that my permission really mattered, it's Lena's life, after all. Lena, who usually had such a serious expression, looked like a young girl in front of Kyle, which reminded me of how I was with my wife. And before I knew it, the wedding preparations were moving along quickly. I muttered to myself, "Still, is it all right that I haven't met his parents yet?" Lena and Kyle had already greeted both sets of parents. But I hadn't met Kyle's parents yet. I thought at the very least we should meet before the wedding, but neither of them seemed eager to arrange it. I don't think there's any need to meet before the wedding. I agree, it's not something we need to impose on you, sir. Needless to say, their words felt off, like they were hiding something. Still, they must have their reasons for not wanting us to meet. So I decided it was wiser to respect their wishes and didn't push the issue. With that in mind, I didn't really intervene up until this day. This is what they call the rehearsal, and I'm told Kyle and his parents will be arriving soon. Oddly enough, I was nervous. I'd been repeating this odd cycle of drinking coffee and heading to the bathroom for 30 minutes, and when I heard the door open, they came inside. Kyle entered, followed by two people who I assumed were his parents. Kyle's mother, Sierra, looked me up and down, from the top of my head to my toes, as if scrutinizing me. I'd heard she was 70, but she looked surprisingly youthful. Trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling, I introduced myself first. "Nice to meet you, I'm Gavin, Lena's father." I extended my hand for a handshake, but they didn't reciprocate. Cautiously, I looked up, and there they were, both of them, staring at me with cold eyes. Oh, I assumed Lena's father would be quite handsome since she's such a beauty. Sierra let out a scoffing laugh as she looked down on me. Standing beside her, Kyle's father, with a stern expression, added in a deep and heavy voice, "About 5 feet 7 inches, I'd say. Average face, not overweight but hardly slim. Quite an unremarkable, middle-of-the-road figure. Mr. No, Gavin." The familiar voice, now dripping with sarcasm, triggered a flood of thoughts in my mind. I hadn't noticed until just now, but the arrogant man standing before me was unmistakably someone I knew. You've got to be kidding me. Tate? That's right. Long time no see. I never imagined I'd run into my old nemesis in a place like this. Tate and I were classmates for only 3 years in middle school. We were never that close. I was always ranked first in our grade, while Tate consistently came in second, just behind me.
Tate had always seen me as a rival.
You're such an obnoxious guy.
You've been top of the class so many times, couldn't you let me have it for once? That's why I hate perfectionists like you.
He'd say things like that to me as I sat reading my book.
It wasn't because I was a perfectionist that I kept getting the top spot. It's just that I couldn't be satisfied unless I gave everything my all.
So my scores for 5 subjects were always either perfect or 499 in total due to small mistakes. Tate was smart too, but he could never surpass me, and after every test, he would throw those kinds of remarks at me. Then, one day in early summer as we were about to graduate, a major event shook my life.
My parents passed away.
I can't go into detail, but after that, I lost all motivation.
I didn't even take the final exams, instead stayed home in a deep depression.
Barely noticing as the heat of summer began to fade. Thanks to my previously high grades, I managed to move up a grade, but I spent my days like a recluse at a relative's home. Tate took advantage of my vulnerability, looking down on me whenever he could.
See? You got what was coming to you. This is what happens when you don't know how to let others have their turn.
Now you've fallen from grace.
Unlike you, I'm transferring to a prestigious private high school, and I'm aiming to become a government official.
You'll be stuck watching my success from the sidelines for the rest of your life.
That was the last insult he threw at me before disappearing from my life.
I heard he moved away to start life in a dorm. I didn't attend any reunions or events after that and cut ties with my old classmates. But just when I thought I'd never recover from losing my parents, a ray of hope entered my life. That hope was my wife, 3 years my senior. Meeting her helped me re-examine my life and gave me the strength to move forward. Though I eventually had to face losing another precious person, I vowed to protect the irreplaceable gift she left behind.
I've worked tirelessly, dedicating everything to Lena's future.
And now, just when I thought my daughter had found the right person to marry, it turns out her father-in-law is none other than my old rival.
It seems fate wasn't willing to forgive my past weakness for running away.
I took a slow, deep breath and faced Tate.
Tate, I never imagined I'd run into you again at this age.
He flashed a sinister grin.
Yeah, funny how life works.
Who'd have thought that the daughter of a useless middle school graduate like you would end up marrying my son?
Life sure is unpredictable.
It was a clear insult.
I didn't care if he insulted me.
But hearing him speak ill of the daughter I had worked so hard to raise was something I couldn't accept. Even back in the day, I never fought back, no matter what Tate said.
I've always hated conflict.
But this time, I felt a primal urge to say something.
Let me make something clear. It's Lena and Kyle who are getting married. We're only becoming in-laws, nothing more and nothing less. Don't confuse that.
It must have struck a nerve. Tate sat down on a nearby sofa, crossing his legs with an air of superiority and said,
I have no intention of becoming in-laws with someone like you.
I'll concede that Lena is brilliant enough to be worthy of marrying into our family. But once they're married, she'll sever ties with you and become a stranger.
We plan to adopt Lena as our own daughter the moment she marries into the family.
Before I could respond, it was Kyle who objected.
Dad, hold on a second. This is the first I'm hearing of this. Mom, did you know anything about this? Sierra, in a mockingly playful tone, replied, Oh, who knows? I'm just a woman who married into this family. What your father says is final. If he says it, then it's going to happen, right? Kyle, has talking to a useless middle school graduate lowered your IQ or something?
I felt a deep sense of contempt for Sierra. Not because of what she said about me, but because she would speak that way to her own son. Kyle's face tightened, and I could see his clenched fists trembling slightly. I now understood why they had been so hesitant to introduce me to his parents. It must have been a shock for Kyle to realize that his father and I knew each other. As I thought about Tate's petty remarks and Sierra's disregard for even their own son, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of parents they were. Before I could decide how to handle the situation, Lena spoke up.
We can't have this kind of tense atmosphere during dress fittings and rehearsal, can we?
There's also a tasting for the course meals today. So please enjoy yourselves. Without addressing the previous conflict, Lena swiftly changed the subject.
Sierra stood up, nodding. That's right. We didn't come here to waste time like this.
We're here to ensure the food we'll serve to our guests is up to par. As Sierra turned her back and walked away, I noticed something odd in the way she dragged her right foot slightly.
Your right foot.
Before I could finish, Sierra cut me off.
Your concern is unnecessary. What could a middle school graduate like you possibly know? With nothing more to say, I let it go. And with that, the two of them left.
The room was now silent, leaving only me, Lena, and Kyle behind. As soon as the door closed, Kyle deeply bowed his head. I'm so sorry for the rude behavior of my parents. They've always had this superiority complex, even I can't control them.
If only my brother were here.
As it turns out, Kyle's older brother had passed away while abroad. My brother was an exceptional pharmacist. From a young age, he was fascinated by pharmacology, and everyone believed he'd become a professional in the field. But when he turned 25, he suddenly announced he was going overseas.
My parents tried to stop him.
Had it been for a vacation or to sharpen his skills at a world-renowned hospital, things might have been different.
But the path Kyle's brother chose was far more grueling. Have you heard of those medical organizations that operate in dangerous parts of the world?
When I heard those words, my heart skipped a beat.
Swallowing hard, I responded slowly. Yes, of course.
So your brother?
Kyle nodded quietly.
That's why my parents tried to stop him.
No more needed to be said.
I didn't need to imagine what Kyle must have felt, or what might have happened to his brother.
It was all too clear. The heavy atmosphere that settled over the room was quickly broken by Lena. Hey, why are we getting so gloomy? I've heard Kyle talk about his brother before, and I know the story. But I'm sure he wouldn't want things to be like this, right?
Lena's words seemed to lift Kyle's spirits, if only a little.
Yeah, you're right. Let's just focus on the wedding for now.
Gavin, once again, I sincerely apologize for the way my parents acted.
I gently placed a hand on Kyle's shoulder. No matter how awful his parents might be, the real stars here are Lena and Kyle. As long as they're happy, that's all that matters.
I decided not to say anything more about what had happened.
After that, neither Tate nor Sierra said anything else.
Maybe it was because the venue staff were around, or perhaps they were just pretending to behave. But they spent the rest of the time smiling without causing any more trouble. I had no idea this was the calm before the storm as I peacefully sampled the course meals and went home. Time passed quickly, and before I knew it, the wedding day had arrived. I never thought that the day would come when Lena, who used to walk behind me saying Daddy would grow up so much and wear a pure white dress. I didn't think it was appropriate to carry around a large portrait of my late wife, so instead, I brought a photograph we had taken on a trip together, to share in the joy of Lena and Kyle's special day. The ceremony was beautiful, an emotional and almost mystical experience that I will never forget. We moved to the reception hall afterward, but that's where the unexpected happened.
What is this seating chart?
Sure enough, it labeled me as useless middle school graduate dad. I could hear murmurs around the room as people noticed, and the staff hurriedly rushed to collect the charts, their faces pale as they repeatedly bowed in apology. At that moment, Lena and Kyle were backstage for their wardrobe change. From the panicked reaction of the staff, there was no doubt in my mind who was behind this.
How about that? My special surprise for you.
I turned around to see Tate, a cold, spiteful grin plastered across his face. Behind Tate, Sierra covered her mouth with a folding fan, making her expression unreadable. But it was clear from her body language that she was mocking me.
My body trembled slightly. It is Lena, not me, who is embarrassed by this humiliation. I'm at this age now, so it doesn't hurt a bit to be humiliated now.
In a wedding full of guests, if the father of the bride is subjected to such humiliation, it would undoubtedly spark rumors. Up until now, I had tried to avoid making a scene, but I'd reached my limit.
To be 61 years old and still come up with something this childish.
I calmly retaliated, but Tate responded with a smug look on his face. I'm a man who graduated from a prestigious university and climbed to the ranks of a government official.
Lena works at a top company, so there's no doubt she's an elite too. But what about you? You gave up on studying, became a shut-in, didn't even take the high school entrance exam, and remain nothing but a middle school graduate. This celebration is for elites only. You should leave immediately.
Tate's angry voice echoed throughout the venue.
The crowd of onlookers grew larger, curious about the commotion.
I was about to speak up, worried about how this would affect Lena's reputation, but before I could, a calm, authoritative voice rang out.
Dad, let's go home. It was deeper than usual.
But there was no mistaking it, it was Lena's voice. I turned around to see her standing there, emotionless, as if she had lost all feeling. She had discarded her wedding gown and was back in her casual clothes from earlier. Next to her, the staff who had frantically collected the seating charts were trembling as they observed the situation.
Lena had clearly heard everything. Kyle joined us a moment later, also dressed down, having taken off his tuxedo. Gavin, let's go.
Though calmer than Lena, Kyle's voice carried a clear undercurrent of anger that made me shudder.
Meanwhile, Sierra and Tate were furious. What's the meaning of this? Kyle, Lena. The reception is about to start. Why are you doing this?
Kyle stepped silently toward his mother, towering over her at 6 feet 3 inches, causing Sierra, much shorter, to let out a small yelp.
What? Mom, aren't you ashamed of what you've done? I am. I understand you want to place your expectations on me after my brother passed away. But I'm not your puppet. I want to live my life on my own terms.
I'll repay the kindness you've shown me, but if you continue like this,
I'm prepared to sever ties with you both. A heavy silence fell over the room.
The guests who had been watching quietly whispered amongst themselves, too intimidated to involve themselves further. Tate, unable to contain himself, shouted angrily,
"How dare you? Defying your parents is unforgivable. Fine, you and Lena can leave. This wedding is off, completely off."
Nothing had changed. Tate was still the same person who once screamed at me to let him have the top spot in school.
I was too exhausted even to sigh. Ignoring Tate, I turned to Lena and said, "You're right. Let's go home." With Tate declaring the wedding canceled, There was no way it could continue.
We were inconveniencing the guests, but leaving now seemed to be the wisest choice.
Just as I turned to leave, a scream erupted behind me.
I spun around to see Sierra collapse, her face pale, as she fell to the floor.
Guests began to panic, some shouting in confusion. I immediately rushed over to her. "Hey! What are you doing to my wife?"
Tate tried to intervene, but I raised my voice for the first time.
"Do you want her to die right here?"
Tate froze at my words, and while he stood in shock, I called for an ambulance. Kyle, still dazed by the sight of his fallen mother, stood frozen, unable to comprehend the situation.
People gathered around, frantically asking what was happening.
Pushing through the crowd came Lena, hurrying to my side. "Dad," she said, she was feeling dizzy earlier. Her steps seemed unsteady, and when she helped me with the veil down, her hands were trembling.
No doubt about it, this was a stroke.
I quickly tilted Sierra onto her side, raised her head slightly, and spoke to her in a calm voice.
She responded, though faintly.
The ambulance had already been called, but until it arrived, I needed to monitor her condition closely. If anything worsened, I would have to perform CPR. As I rolled up my sleeves, Kyle, having regained his composure, rushed over.
"What's going to happen to my mom?"
"Fortunately, she's still conscious.
But with a stroke, if treatment isn't started immediately, there can be severe after effects or worse. We'll do what we can until help arrives." Kyle nodded vigorously.
But one person still wasn't grasping the situation.
It was Tate. "Hey! Get away from Sierra!"
He was clearly panicking, unable to process what had happened. Despite his relatives trying to explain and calm him down, Tate kept shouting her name, seemingly unable to hear anyone. Watching him, I couldn't help but think back to my own past. I looked at the photo of my wife in my pocket and prayed,
"Please, let me save her this time. Give me strength." Just then, the staff outside called out that the ambulance had arrived, rushing in. "Let's go."
I tucked the photo back into my pocket and steeled myself. Hours later, after surgery, I received word from Kyle that Sierra had survived. The wedding had to be canceled anyway, so after Sierra was brought in, Lena and I were handling the return of gifts and explaining the situation. But hearing that Sierra was saved filled me with relief, and I felt my body go limp.
Lena supported me. "You did great, Dad." "I'm so glad she pulled through." "Yeah, but it's not over yet.
There's still a lot to take care of."
Lena nodded slowly. As we walked down the moonlit street, we headed toward the hospital where Sierra had been admitted.
Visiting hours ended at 8 p.m., so we only had about 30 minutes left. We hurried to the room and arrived just as Sierra was waking up, gazing blankly at the ceiling while Tate clutched her hand, sobbing uncontrollably.
Kyle noticed us and gestured for us to enter. "Thank you for coming."
"Dad, come on." Kyle's words seemed to prompt Tate, who fidgeted awkwardly, opening and closing his mouth as if trying to find the right words.
I sighed. "Look, I didn't save Sierra because you told me to. I don't need some half-hearted thanks." Tate looked down, embarrassed. After a brief silence, Sierra whispered something in a raspy voice. "Sophia. Mom, don't push yourself. Just rest for now. We'll talk again later." Kyle's gentle words lulled Sierra back into sleep.
"Dad, just wait here for a moment."
After leaving the hospital, Lena and Kyle went to grab some takeout for dinner.
That left me and Tate alone, in a silence thick with awkwardness. Surprisingly, it was Tate who spoke first.
When Sierra collapsed, I was completely useless. "You and Lena stayed so calm, Have you worked in medicine before?
Tate still believed I had only a middle school education, so he was probably shocked. It was time to explain what had happened in my life.
No, I'm not a middle school graduate.
I was delayed for a couple of years, but I passed my GED and went on to college.
I became a doctor. A doctor?
I recalled that Tate had once said he wanted to be a doctor too. I had assumed Tate would pursue a medical degree, given his ambitions, but that wasn't the case. Although being a high-ranking bureaucrat is certainly impressive, it seems Tate didn't choose that path out of passion. In my family, becoming a bureaucrat was a tradition passed down through generations. The pressure was enormous, and my father constantly criticized me for never being able to claim the top spot in school, Tate admitted. That's why he was so obsessed with being number one. But what would be the point if he only achieved that by me holding back? Tate had understood that too. When you didn't transfer to a prestigious high school with your grades, I was relieved. Thanks to that, I became the top student at my new school, did well at university, and eventually became a bureaucrat. But no matter how far I climbed, I always felt empty inside.
Because he wasn't there. You mean Keith?
Tate's eyes widened in surprise when I mentioned his late son's name. He froze, staring at me. I pulled out the photo of my wife from my pocket and showed it to him. In the picture were my wife, myself, and...
How do you know Keith? Keith and I worked closely together in a medical aid organization.
My wife, Sophia, was a nurse.
Alongside Keith, who had extensive knowledge of medicine, we saved countless lives. My heart ached with both nostalgia and sorrow. I could never forget that day. You should be proud of Keith's final moments.
As a member of the medical team, he carried out his duty bravely.
Sophia and I did everything we could.
But in the end, Keith insisted that the valuable resources be used for the children in need, not himself. He was a truly kind soul. He never spoke of his family, so I didn't know his story.
But I think it's time to give you this. I take out something I had tucked away in my wallet. It was a small piece of paper. It's a note Keith left behind.
As Tate read the note, sobs escaped him, and he collapsed to the ground.
Keith. He wasn't really my son.
I married Sierra when Keith was 13, and even though I wasn't his biological father,
I loved him like my own. And now he's gone.
Oh, Keith. Tate fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, forming a large puddle on the asphalt beneath the clear night sky. Just then, Lena and Kyle returned, rushing over, alarmed by the sight of Tate in such a state. But Tate was too overcome with grief to explain, sobbing like a child. A few days later, once Sierra had regained enough strength to speak, I visited her in the hospital.
Although she couldn't get out of bed yet, the quick treatment meant she wouldn't suffer lasting damage, and with rehabilitation, she would be able to return to her normal life. The moment Sierra saw me, she spoke.
That photo, it's of Sophia, isn't it?
You know my wife?
Sierra closed her eyes quietly and revealed an unexpected connection.
When I was 19, I studied abroad in England.
I was training to be a nurse, and that's when I met Sophia. She was only 13 at the time,
but we bonded over our admiration for Florence Nightingale.
I ended up having Keith at 21 and had to give up on my dream of becoming a nurse.
But Sophia must have become a wonderful nurse, didn't she?
Indeed, as Sierra had guessed, Sophia had earned the nickname the modern-day Nightingale in the field, with everyone calling her the saint with the lamp. By the time I met Sophia, she was 35, but her skills as a nurse were exceptional. We worked together, got married, and alongside Keith, saved many lives. When Keith collapsed during a mission from a stroke, I lost control, behaving far from what was expected of a doctor.
But even then, Sophia remained calm, and Keith, despite his fading consciousness, prioritized others over himself.
I promised Keith that if I ever returned to the States and met his parents, I would deliver a message.
He said that while his life might end there,
he hoped his parents would live long lives. He especially wanted his mother to take extra care of her health.
Knowing the family history of strokes,
Sierra had already heard from Tate about what happened to Keith.
Staying calm, she gave a small nod.
Then, with a strained voice, she said, "After Keith's passing, both Tate and I became fixated on Kyle. We wanted him to live a happy and ordinary life, but in our pride and prejudice,
we hurt Lena and you."
It wasn't until I saw the look on Kyle's face that I realized how foolish we had been. Apologizing won't fix it, but please,
let me say it. I'm sorry. And thank you for saving me.
She extended her hand for a handshake, her gesture and sincerity clear. There was no reason for me to reject it.
As a doctor, I did what was expected of me. You don't need to thank me for that.
But please, when Lena visits, apologize to her.
That's all I ask.
As we shook hands, Sierra looked me in the eye, tears flowing steadily down her face.
For several long, heartfelt moments. Afterward, both families sat down together and reconciled. Though I may never fully forgive Tate and Sierra for their actions, acknowledging their mistakes is enough. For me, the most important thing is that Lena is happy, and that's all that matters. Oh, Dad, the baby just moved,
Lena said, gently rubbing her slightly rounded belly. Kyle, standing beside her, lovingly embraced both Lena and their unborn child, his arms wrapping them in a protective gesture. This simple, everyday moment was the happiness I had always wished for.
Sophia, too, would have surely placed Lena's happiness above all else.
One day, I received a call from Tate.
"I'd like you to come and pay your respects at Keith's grave." Without hesitation, I made my way there.
The sunlight filtered softly through the trees, and the well-maintained plants swayed gently,
creating an almost serene beauty that made it easy to forget we were in a cemetery.
Before Keith's grave, a laminated note had been placed.
"I'm doing just fine."
Just that one sentence, but it spoke volumes. I imagine Keith had left it, hoping his parents back home would feel reassured. Though Keith's life was tragically cut short by illness before he could fully realize his mission, the note captured his bright, cheerful,
and carefree spirit perfectly. "Welcome home, Keith."
As a gentle breeze passed through, carrying Tate's words upward, I felt certain they had reached Keith. The cloudless sky above us seemed to reflect Keith's peaceful and untroubled heart.